Hello, everyone. I did not post a live video or do a live session last night because of the Labor Day holiday. I hope you guys all enjoyed that. You had time with your family, your friends, or just time by yourself. I did the same. And so I'm going to post this later today. My topic today is going to be on the power of prayer and what it has to do with managing your anxiety from a personal and a professional perspective. So, before we get into that, though, if you're new finding this channel, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Kimberly Christian. I live in the state of Texas, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and faith based therapist. And I love, love, love combining things that bring God and psychology together. That's my life's mission, and I do it in my parenting, I do it in all my relationships, and I am doing that now here. So, if you are looking for ways to empower your mental health by looking at all aspects of it with a biblical perspective, this is your channel. And I hope that not only you will subscribe so that you can see all the videos when they come out, you will also tell others about this. Mental health is one of those areas, especially around believers in the church. It's just one of those areas that there is still such a stigma. And by you telling other people, not only are you making life better for them, that they can hear the information that they need, but you are starting those conversations that really need to be had. I have lots of things on this channel talking about how to check in with your loved ones, how to assess for a true crisis, how to deal with things when you're not sure if it really is or not. I have so many topics here already, and there's so many more to come. So I hope that you will stay tuned and consider subscribing and interact with me. Post a comment on here. Let me know if it is something that has been beneficial to you or if there's another topic that you would like to hear me talk about. Tonight, I am tackling the topic of anxiety and a prayer life and what those two things have to do with each other. I can tell you as a therapist that I hear about anxiety and depression more than anything else, as you can imagine. I treat a lot of other diagnoses, but those are the two that a lot of other things are birthed from, and they're the ones that I treat most often. I also have a personal connection with both of those two diagnoses. And so if you are, maybe you've heard me share my testimony on a different video that I did, a different podcast interview called Uplift Nations with Rob Leach. You're welcome to check that out. I talk a lot more about my story and why this is so important to me, but I've talked about it in many other interviews that I have done. Just know this. I have been touched by depression and anxiety in my own life. So I am coming at this with a ton of knowledge and a ton of compassion and a ton of practice. It is something that I deal with daily in my own life. But I also love teaching people what works and what doesn't. And so we are coming at this from the angle of how do you deal with your anxiety through your prayer life, especially in a healthy way. Because my approach is not to shame you any further than you might already be, and thinking that, if I just prayed more, this would go away. If I made better decisions, this would go away. What have I done to bring on this diagnosis? And I know that just goes across the board with depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, all types of anxiety, OCD, PTSD, all of those things. And I'm not going to address all those questions. That's not for today's video, but I will tell you that there's a lot of power in praying during times of anxiety. And in a healthy approach, what I will say is let's think for a second about not what is making you anxious, because there is a ton of education around that and it's very individualized. Let's talk about in the background what is going on that would cause someone to feel anxiety. If you know me and you've worked with me, you know that my first question or my first statement to that is going to be your thoughts. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist, and I absolutely believe that your thoughts are at the root of that. Yes, that's true. And what goes along with that is your thoughts can be something like, I've got this. I can't trust other people with this. I don't have time to explain this to somebody else. I don't want to ask for help. I don't like asking for help. And the list goes on, right? But what's underneath all of that sometimes is control. What's underneath sometimes for that is, I don't want to surrender this, or I don't know how to surrender this. Or the last time I tried to surrender this, I ended up taking it back from the Lord anyway, and I just took matters into my own hands. I think a lot of us have a story that looks like that, if we're being really honest. But when we are deciding to truly cast our cares upon Him, we're deciding to truly surrender that. Does it take away all of the anxiety? I don't think so. I don't think it all goes away. But I think what happens, and what I have seen happen time and time again, is that peace now enters the equation. You might still feel uncertainty because the situation hasn't been resolved. You might still feel concern because it still looks bad. God He hasn't done anything yet. He hasn't intervened on your behalf yet for you to actually see that. But what happens is when we take those things to the Lord, no one comforts us like that, right? No one has the ability to comfort us like being in His presence. That's why so many people will say, I don't know what happened, but the minute I started praying, I just felt something wash over me. I just felt a calmness. I just felt relaxed. I felt at peace, right? And so that's what we're going after. We are going after realizing that He not only has the ability to change our situation in an instant, but He knows everything that we don't. And that says a lot. He knows everything about our situation. We don't have to explain it to Him. Sometimes when we are dealing with an issue, and this happens in therapy every single day, in every single session, a person shows up to their session and they are having to recall situations that have happened in the last week that they have seen since they saw their therapist last. They're having to say, well, this is what happened at home. This is what happened at work. And they go, basically they do a play-by-play of the whole situation, because as a therapist, we need that. If we're going to give good counsel, we need to know what happened, who was involved. Like, I've always been a detailed person, but as a therapist, I see why God made me that way. I need details so that I can give good judgment, good counsel. Otherwise, it's a snap judgment, and it's not very wise at all. But here's how that plays into prayer life and anxiety. We don't have to explain anything to God. We don't have to walk Him through who did what and where we were and what we were thinking. He already knows. He knows way better than we do. We can just simply request that He involve Himself, that we invite Him into the situation, that we lay it at His feet and say, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do it well. I know that I keep getting in the way. I need to empty myself completely of who I am so that You can be You. And You can show up, and You can either change the situation or change me, or both. So there's a lot of personal examples that I can give of this. Of course, I won't be sharing anything that would break confidentiality, but I can just tell you that there are countless situations where people have dealt with high anxiety, and we have looked at it from a number of angles, trying to, and all those angles work, by the way. When we talk about it physically, they need to address it physically. When we're talking about it from a mental perspective, an emotional perspective, absolutely. They need to get their thoughts right. They need to understand when their feelings are not accurate because they're based on distorted thinking. All of those things are true. This doesn't negate that in any possible way. But I can tell you the patients that I have worked with before that are open to faith-based conversations, their story looks different because our conversations look different. I can bring scripture into the situation. I can bring concepts that I know of their faith that will help them to realize much of what I've just shared here. that they don't have to explain something to God. He's already on the story, whether it's about you and your life and your family, or maybe you're someone who, like many people I've known, they get really anxious about the world around them. They get really anxious about someone in their life that they either feel responsible for, or that person's going through a really difficult time, and they want to know, what can I do? What can I do to support them? What can I do to bring this through them? And again, I will say, it is just as simple as being able to say, Lord, they need you. God, be who you are. Show up in their lives. Be in their midst. Bring the peace that passes all understanding. Create a way when there isn't a way. Show them exactly who you are, exactly what you're about. Pour your love and your spirit upon them. Like any of these phrases we can offer, and God already knows everything about who we're talking about, and what's best for them, what's best for the person that you are bringing to his awareness in your prayer. I have seen those situations get better much more quickly, much more easily, because faith-based therapy, something that I'm very passionate about, is ultimately exactly what we're talking about. It's taking something that a person believes so wholeheartedly as the tenets of their faith. And now they're taking something that they're learning that has psychological backing, and they're pairing those two things together and realizing this actually works. This really works. I'm taking on this thought or this idea that my faith does not dispute. There's nothing in the way of that. And so their story looks different. Does that mean that someone who is not a believer, not a follower of Christ, is not going to deal with their anxiety well? Absolutely not. That does not mean that. I've helped many people. I will continue to help many people that maybe are not open to that now or ever. I always hope that for them, because I know the value that it has in my life and those that I know. But there are plenty of skills that I also teach those folks that help them to realize, this is how I deal with my anxiety. But prayer absolutely does change things, and God will show up in situations that you can't even fathom. You can't even imagine how he is going to cause you to feel better, to think better, to speak better, to engage with people better. But he understands. This is something he understands well. Remember, our God took on flesh. He came into the world that he created in a human form and lived life as a human. Fully. He was fully God and fully human. And I think sometimes we tend to really focus on one and not the other, maybe leaving the other one out a little bit. But this is what Scripture tells us. He was both. And if he was both, if he was exactly who he said he was and is, then that means he experienced all the things that we do, only he lived a sinless life. He didn't give in to any of the temptations. He didn't fall into any of the barriers that we do. He's our model. He's our example. But don't forget that he knows what that feels like, to feel nervous, to feel uncertain, to feel confused. Right? He didn't have, he had access to absolutely anything at all. But did he capitalize? Did he tap into that all the time? I don't think so. I don't think that the Bible shows us that he was tapping into the vast knowledge of God all the time. He could, but just like he I can't think of the right word to describe this here. This is in a verse in Philippians, I believe. But because he came at the into the very nature of a servant, it's like he downgraded. He downgraded from his glory, from his deity, to be here with us, to live this life that we couldn't live, and to die a death that we deserved. But he understood, and continues to, all of the struggles that we have. So why would we not go to him? Well, I think I've hopefully done a pretty good job of convincing you how important it is to do that, but let's talk about some of the reasons why we don't. Accepting help is hard. I have just dealt with some sessions regarding that topic just very recently in the last week, where the patient expressed to me how difficult it is for them to ask for what they need. Sometimes those barriers are what I mentioned earlier. The person might think, well, no one's going to do it the way that I do. I don't want to have to redo this later. I know how to, so why wouldn't I? It's a lot of controlling type thoughts that come to us. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that that's what it is if we're describing that. But here's an analogy that I've spoken with patients over the years, and I think it's really helped. I know it's absolutely helped me, is when you realize the connection between you being able to accept help from your fellow humans really indicates what it's like when you need help from God, one way or another. I'm not suggesting that we put too much on other people, that we're constantly, depending upon them more than we need to, just in an effort to be able to accept God's help. What I'm saying is there's a very similar line of thinking that can go along with that. Like, asking for help is wrong. Asking for help is a bad thing. It's a weakness. And we associate that with things like showing emotion, being tearful, so many other behaviors and ideas are associated with this is a weak thing. Going through a difficult time and crying is normal. Going through a really difficult time and falling apart because you just can't take the pressure anymore, that's normal. All those things are very normal human things. I'm not blaming that at all. What I am suggesting, however, is that we apply some of these concepts and we really look at, if someone's told me that I have a difficult time asking or receiving help, I need to look at that. I need to look at that and think about, why is that a struggle for me? Is it a pride issue? I would say probably yes. There's some sort of pride in that. And if you listened to the video that I posted last week when I was talking about hope, one of the things I said is, as Christians, we need to get more comfortable talking about pride. We do. All of us deal with it. And we need to be more comfortable and really realizing we all have that as an issue. Some more than others, some longer than others, but all of us have that issue. And that's what gets in the way a lot of the time. Right? So if we know that we have a thought like that keeps us from receiving help from other people, chances are we have a really difficult time receiving help from the Lord, because we're casting some of those messages that we would to other people on more of a lateral scale up to Him, and saying, I don't want to bother you with that. I know you know what to do, but I should know what to do here, so I'm not going to burden you. Do you think that God is burdened by His children needing Him? Think about that. He operates from a place very, very different than us. In our human energy levels, yes, we can get really tired of our children needing us. We can get tired of the questions. We can get tired of the request, of the complaints. Absolutely. But we also need to sleep every single night. Okay, God's different. It's not even comparable to us. So us going to Him and asking for His help only creates a stronger bond. It only creates more of an attachment, a healthy attachment. It's not healthy to depend on other humans to meet all of our needs. But strangely enough, and beautiful enough, it's incredibly healthy to seek the Lord out to meet all of our needs. That's not codependency, but the other one is. So, I want to ask you to think about, because I know that this is not live, you're not able to put comments in here right now, but I want you to think about the times where you have been really anxious about a situation and prayer changed it for you. Whether it is, big, whether it is small. I know that you probably have that story. I have that story. I have that story many times over. But sometimes we need to look in our history and be reminded of that, so that in the smaller everyday things that we are dealing with in that season, we can say, oh, that's right. I was holding on to that. I was somehow thinking that I didn't need him, that I was going to burden him, that it was going to be too much for him, that I already had the right answer. I needed to look within. But we all have a story where none of those things would work. And we were more forced to go to the Lord and ask him, please help me figure this out. Please help me make this decision. There's so much riding on this thing, this interview, this project, this whatever this is. I can't mess this up. Why can't everything be like that? Why can't we look at our every single day like, God, there's too much riding on this. Time is so precious, and I don't have any of it to lose. I need you to show up in my day, because this day matters. And help me to know where to go. Help me to know when to go, when to stay, when to speak, when to be silent, when to share, when to keep that to myself and my safe people. So my story, or at least one aspect of my story that, as I mentioned before, I shared this only one time so far in an interview, but it's when the truthfulness of my struggles with anxiety became really apparent to me. If I look back on my life and I'm really honest, not that I'm being dishonest, but if I'm being really, really careful and thoughtful about my life, it's been there all along. I've always been that kind of human that wanted to do the right things and wanted to please my parents as the oldest child. I've always felt really responsible. All of those things, they were present early on, which sort of lays groundwork for someone who would deal with anxiety. Never taught that, never talked about it. Not that it was a taboo thing or anything like that. I just didn't grow up in a time period where we knew what we know now. Of course, that's just the way that it always is. But when I started getting into my early 20s is when it was really obvious to me. I started to understand what I now know to be intrusive thoughts. I started to experience what I now know to be a panic attack or panic attacks. I've only had, a few in all of my life, but there was one that marks so much for my life. And this is what I shared in the interview with Rob. I was having a physical reaction to some pain. And it was just a swirl of mind, body, and spirit connection happening. And I happened to be driving at the time. I was driving home from school. And the pain was so intense that I was experiencing that it just started creating a panic, like an absolute panic. Much of what you guys know, where I thought something was really wrong. Something was really wrong. I just didn't know how bad it was, but my mind was taking me to a place of, I might die. I just didn't know how serious it was. And so I was having to make some really quick decisions about, pulling over to the side of the road. Whom was I going to call? Was I going to call my parents first or call the paramedics? And anyway, it was very intense. It was a very intense experience. And I bring this up today because the power of prayer is what changed everything. I was losing the ability to speak as a result of being this anxious, which I'd never experienced before in my life. And thank God, I've never experienced since. But now I know it happens. I could not articulate any words to come out of my mouth. That was also super scary for me because I'm a talker and I couldn't get the words out. And but I knew that I could still pray. I didn't need words to be able to pray. In my mind, I was just asking God to show up and to to act on all of those things. Help me to pull over safely. Help me to get the words out. Help me to know what to do. I did not have the skill set that I have today, not even close. I was just beginning my journey as a social worker. I was literally going to school at that time to become a licensed social worker in the master's program. But I ended up calling my parents, and I couldn't get anything out of my mouth. I couldn't squeak out any words, but somehow, by the power of God, I was able to ask my dad to pray. And he did. He prayed for me right there on the spot. He was telling my mom to pray. Of course, they were completely, as you can imagine, completely freaked out, not knowing what was going on because I couldn't articulate anything. I was just asking them to pray. And I might have, been able to get a couple of other words out because, long story short, I was able to get help, and everything worked out, beautifully, and God showed up in a mighty, mighty way. But I don't think any of us were ever the same after that. And it started really solidifying my journey of understanding that I was already choosing the field. That decision had already been made. But then here I experienced the very thing that only God knew that I was going to encounter for decades to come with people that had experienced what I was experiencing, that serious and more so. So I needed that experience. God used it in my life to, number one, bring me closer to Him for sure, to see His power and His ability to be right there in the moment and to be such a comfort and such a help, and to work through the people that were coming to assist me, but also to store away that knowledge for a day where I was going to be able to draw from that. Up until very, very recently, I have not shared anything about my personal struggles with my patients because it's just not appropriate. But as I've stepped into more of this kind of platform, sharing things, hopefully to get that to more people, these messages to a further reach, I have felt it on my heart to go ahead and share these things. But it's not appropriate in a one-on-one session with someone for them to hear about my life, because then they start thinking about me and they start worrying about me and they start asking me questions. Well, what did you do? And how would you handle this? And their time with me is their time with me, first and foremost. End of story. But if it builds credibility for you guys to know that I do understand this, I'm speaking to you very heartfelt. I do understand how challenging it is as a believer to realize that Jesus is everything to you. And yet you have these times that you just really worry and you don't want to. You don't want to go to that place. But it happens. And your mind starts to run rampant. And you have a hard time slowing it down. And your mind and your body and your spirit are connected. God designed it that way. I am here as living proof to tell you that panic attacks can be avoided, that you can align your thoughts with God, with His Word, and anxiety will never look the same for you again. I promise you that. And so I want to leave you with this today. I know I've talked about my program in a few videos, but you're going to hear about it a lot more often. I have hesitated in the last 6 months in pushing that message as forward as I really would like to, because it feels awkward. Any of you professionals that might be watching this, somebody else that's in this field, it feels so uncomfortable to be a therapist and to do anything that feels salesy or marketing-ish. But I was really encouraged by someone recently that said to me, "You have an answer to a question that many people have." And she was right. I have an answer to a question that many of you people are wondering. How do I manage my anxiety? How do I keep from having episodes of depression? And how do I do that God's way? So have I changed the way that I'm doing therapy? No, not really. I'm still, a very skills-based person. I'm a very solution-focused therapist. I'm a very strengths-based, family systems-based therapist. But I'm doing it more boldly. I'm giving people exactly what they need if they are open into seeking God in that equation. I know that some people will not. I know that it's just not the right thing for some people, maybe ever, or at least not at the time that they're hearing this. But another way that God showed up in my anxiety was as I was writing the content for the Christian Method last year. I knew that something huge was going to be born from that project, and I've known it for close to 20 years now. But I knew that, just like I was saying before, I didn't want to mess it up. So much was riding on it, and I wanted it to be something that had His seal of approval on it. And I was nervous, and I felt a lot of anxiety. I just wanted it to be just right. But it was in those moments that I would sit at my computer and surrender and say, Lord, I don't know how you want to verbalize this. I don't know what people need to hear. I don't know what song pairs with this. I don't know what scriptures are going to speak the most to people. And I would take a breath, and I would just sit here, and I would be sometimes even uncomfortable in that silence. But God delivered every single time. He would bring me to the right person that would bring me to the right verse. He would bring the right song on at exactly the right time that would remind me of His nature or remind me of, a point that needed to be made. But if you have listened to the Christian Method, if you're someone who's already gone through the program or you're thinking about doing it, just know you are going to encounter God. Did I play a part in that? Yeah, a small one. I like to think of myself as like the co-author. I typed out what He was telling me. But this is cognitive behavioral therapy from a biblical perspective. And it has changed my life. It has changed the lives of many people that I've treated, and I want it to change yours. I want you to look back years from now and say, I don't think at all the way that I did before. I can't even remember the last time I had a panic attack or when I've had a true depressive episode. And it doesn't mean that God comes in and He heals and He cures you of any mental ailment. That's not what I'm promising at all. I am telling you that when you align your thoughts with God's word, you look at life totally in a different way, and you don't induce anxiety. You don't induce depression. You are managing things on all accounts that you need to, all the things that really matter to Him. Not perfectly, not all the time, but you're being intentional about it. So this signature on-demand online program is available to anyone that is in the United States. I just want you to reach out to me. Let me know what questions you have. Schedule an assessment with me. I'll be happy to tell you if it's right for you. I will also be happy to tell you if it's not the right thing for you. I am blessed with a career that has taught me how to do assessments, and I can let you know what would be helpful to you, but just take that first step. This is the season where you need to reevaluate, where are you? Where are you mentally and physically and emotionally and spiritually? What do you need? Ask for what you need. And don't assume that it's not going to work. Don't assume that it's going to be something that's going to be too much for you. Just ask questions and get some answers. I promise you, this is a light that I cannot and will not, hold under a blanket. I'm going to put it up on a lampstand and say, everybody needs to see this. It's in God's word. The way that we are supposed to live and the way that we are supposed to think, it is very, very important to Him. It's become super abundantly important to me. And I know that I do this differently than anybody else does because He called me and He's equipped me. And I would love nothing more than to be that guide in your life that can help you to put some of these things in your past and to live the rest of your life with hope. Because hope is your future. If you know Christ, hope is your future. I hope you have enjoyed this. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that you tuned in. Leave me a comment on how this has helped you, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys next Monday.